I think it would be important to know that, oh yeah, sometimes people do shit because it's the thing to do. Not because they were trying to make money.
Right.
Not because they're trying to be famous. Not because they wanted to be in a museum. Some they did it because it was the thing to do to feel connected to other human beings and to continue to celebrate the new idea. It will never stop. Punk will never die. It won't be called punk necessarily. It'll never die.
Welcome to Deviate with Rolf Potts, where I talk with experts, public figures, and interesting people about fascinating topics that meander off topic. Today I explore the theme of music and the role it plays in our lives, how we remember the music we listened to when we were younger, and how our relationship to it transforms over time. On a more general level, this is also an exploration of creative integrity and how to best maintain it. And to unpack these themes, I talked to this guy.
Rolf Potts, it's Ian MacKaye here. 6 o'clock, Monday, May 21st. My apologies.
I've been doing this podcast for the better part of a year now, and I've interviewed some amazing people, including some of my travel writing role models. But I'll confess, none of these interviews generated the same starstruck excitement I felt when I got a phone message from Ian MacKaye, who's probably best known as the front man of a band called Fugazi and the co-founder of Dischord Records in Washington, D.C. Now, if you already know who Ian MacKaye is, you can probably skip straight to the interview since his reputation as a pioneer of do-it-yourself punk rock precedes him. But while Fugazi had a huge influence on an entire generation of music, most notably the so-called grunge movement of the 1990s, the band never made videos for MTV, rarely if ever appeared on commercial radio, and refused interviews with major music magazines like Spin and Rolling Stone. While major label bands like Pearl Jam and Nirvana publicly agonized over the notion of authenticity in the face of fame, Fugazi embodied musical authenticity, releasing all of their albums for $10 or less on their own label in DC, refusing to sell merchandise like t-shirts, and playing $5 live shows at all ages venues around the country. Fugazi was, in short, about music and the creative community of music, not hype or stardom or the mindless pursuit of material success. In fact, the rock journalist Michael Azerrad wrote that if Henry David Thoreau had managed a rock band, it probably would have been run a lot like Fugazi. All these years later, in an age when we have digital access to almost every song ever recorded, it's hard to describe just how affecting this song, Fugazi's Waiting Room, was when I first heard it. 1990 is generally considered a low ebb year for popular music. This was when lame corporate acts like Warrant and Vanilla Ice hit it big. And nothing I was hearing on the radio compared to the raw and original energy I felt when I heard Waiting Room play for the first time. Fugazi was one of a handful of bands around that time that changed the way I listened to music, and once I realized there was so much more out there than what I heard on the radio and read about in glossy magazines, it changed my way of thinking in a way that went beyond music. It was as if I realized that everywhere there was this hidden world of abundance, these new sounds and new ideas and new ways of walking through the world, that I hadn't known existed because I hadn't bothered to look. I began to actively seek out the music that excited me, sometimes traveling back in time to find bands I'd missed out on years before. This is actually something I tried to describe to Ian MacKaye before our formal interview began. Yeah, I sort of went backwards. It's funny how we come into music at different times, right? And so I sort of had to do my back research and figure out what I was listening to.
Understood. I always tell people about this, being at when Black Flag stayed. The first time they came to Washington was February of '81, and they stayed at my parents' house for like 3 days. And I said, so what do you guys listen to on the road? And they're like, oh, Black Sabbath, Stooges, and, something. I was like, oh. And then I'm thinking like, the Three Stooges? Like, I had no idea who the Stooges at all.
Really?
Music, like anything else, is once you start to study it, like once you stop taking like the force-fed version of it and you actually start to seek it, it just takes you into crazy. Like there's a million tributaries.
Our interview took place in what is known as the Dischord House on the Virginia side of suburban D.C. For years, this modest wooden house was home to Dischord Records. It's also where Ian and his musical collaborators lived, going back to his first hardcore punk bands, the Teen Idols, and perhaps most notably Minor Threat. It now serves as a kind of de facto monument to an archive of DIY punk and post-punk music. Thanks to this archive, you can now go to Dischord.com and download any live concert Fugazi ever played. I'll link to that in the show notes. Part of the thrill of visiting Dischord House came when Ian showed me old concert flyers and played me old practice recordings in the very room where Waiting Room, the song that had changed the way I listened to music all those years ago, had been written. At one point during the tour of the house, Ian showed me a collection of letters various people had written him over the years.
This is my, complicated is crazy people, crazy letters.
Okay.
Which I have a lot of. And, friends, bands writing me, just correspondence. The one that people get a kick out of is this one.
15 and looking for an HC. Find anyone in Springfield.
Right.
I'm trying to guess.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. It's Magic Marker.
Right. Time to call after school before bedtime.
Right. That's awesome. Ian was showing me was a letter from a 15-year-old Dave Grohl, who would later go on to find fame with Nirvana and the Foo Fighters, but as a Virginia teenager wanted nothing more than to meet Ian MacKaye and release his band's album on Dischord Records. In a weird way, Ian has over the years achieved his greatest mainstream recognition less for his songs so much as the fact that his musical integrity has famously earned the fierce respect of multi-platinum selling rock stars. Not just Dave Grohl, but Michael Stipe and Joan Jett and Joe Strummer of The Clash and Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam, who once showed up to an MTV interview with the word Fugazi written on his hand in magic marker. Our conversation mainly explores the meaning of music, both on a personal level and on a wider level of how it's understood in the context of history, and how for every official understanding of music that you might find in places like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there are tens of thousands of more meaningful narratives that reflect how we experience music in real time. Our conversation took place over iced tea in the kitchen of the Dischord House earlier this summer. Let's listen in. In the early 90s, an authenticity discourse entered the discussion, because of the idea that Nirvana was reinfusing punk into popular music and that suddenly intent mattered, right? And I think that's part of what rose the Fugazi ship, right? Because Fugazi stood out as this band. Authenticity is a complicated word, but a principled band, So suddenly that idea was popular as part of the wider art.
Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it became a popular idea because we were a band that did that.
Well,
so we were actually.
I mean, that's what Michael.
We were much bigger. Book. Yeah, we were much. We were much bigger than Nirvana before they signed.
Right.
We were already sold. I think Repeater had sold a couple 100,000 records or something. So
did it before?
Yeah,
before
yes.
Nirvana broke.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, Our Band Could Be Your Life.
Yeah.
That book.
I've never read it, but I know it, of course.
Yeah. Well, it sort of makes that assertion,
right.
that without, Fugazi and Minor Threat and Husker Du and all these other bands, then that created this moment.
Right, but I don't really, in my mind, all roads didn't lead to Nirvana.
Okay.
I just find that as specious, and I don't really, don't think about it like that. To me, it was a phenomenon. I mean, there are people I knew, and it just, again, advertising works.
Yeah.
I didn't see that as I don't know. It didn't really. I don't equate sales with. I guess I don't think of it as like that. Yeah, this is clearly this. Finally, it all came together with this perfect moment. I just don't buy into that. I actually think the most perfect music was made for me was in the late '70s by a band that sold a few hundred copies of a record.
What's an example?
Like the Black Flag "Nervous Breakdown" single. Yeah, I think it's kind of a perfect record, and it's totally trashy sounding, but that was a profoundly important piece of music, and they sold, I don't know how many copies of that single, maybe 10 or 20,000 now over the 40 years since it's come out, but maybe, I don't know if they sold that many, maybe it's come out in other versions, but that was a record that, just using them as an example, was so illuminating, to hear it and this is happening somewhere else, not just with us. or the Bad Brains. I mean, who were the most important band for me in 1980? Then you have a record out. They were the most important band.
Who put out their record?
They put their first record out on their own.
Okay.
Henry and I lent them money to put out their first record.
Huh.
Then they did a second release on this Roar cassette. It was this, I can't remember the Roar, RIOR. I can't remember what it stands for anymore. Roar? Yeah. But it was out in New York. That's they did the cassette. Then they got signed. They did a record like with Rick Ocasek producing or something. It was some weird like that. But the point being that the single, there's only 1,000 copies of that. That record was hugely influential. The first Bad Brains single, massively important. I think the thing about what I'm interested in, and I'm always interested in, is the new idea. And if you think about
the new idea of any given moment,
the new idea that to me, punk is. People say, "What is punk?" It's not a sound for me. It's not like a style of music. It's not a look. It's not even really an attitude. Although it could be any one of those things. But for me, punk is the free space. It's the place where new ideas can be presented without having to hew to profit motives only. Which is what people, in almost all the other arenas, when you get into it, there's always someone has to make money. So then that perverts the new idea. Because the problem with new ideas is they have no audience because they've not been thought of yet. Right? So there's no audience. Punk, for me, was when I got involved with it, it was like the most recent incarnation of a community or a scene that gathered to be presented with new ideas. So jazz was that, blues was that, and rock was that, and hip hop was that, and beat was that, and folk was that. But it was people who came and said, like, "What do you got?" And those were small gatherings. And if you think about the really huge changing thing in the history of the world, most of the really profound ideas were not thought of in rooms with 25 or 30,000 people. There's only a few people. I mean, how many people were at that damn last dinner? Right? 12? Right? It wasn't 10,000. Apparently that had an effect on the world, that little gathering. So I feel like those are the kind of things, that's what I'm interested in. I don't really care about the bigger number. I'm always interested in maybe what later on led to that number.
Well, I have a convoluted question for you that maybe can pull all this together, and I'm really curious to know what you think. Because I'm interested in the archiving aspect of what you do, and then also in the idea that, like a Black Flag single can be so meaningful, a 70s one versus the pop Nirvana moment later. So the convoluted question is...
Well, it might be an age issue, but go ahead.
Right. It feels like when you decided, there was sort of an archivist instinct behind wanting to record the Teen Idols.
Of course.
Because of that, everything else, you have Dischord Records. The archiving impulse in its own small way led to...
Documentation.
Right. We've just been upstairs and seen all of the very meticulous documentation you've done.
Along with people, friends, and help. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Right. You as a metaphor for...
Thank you. I'm just trying to give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely.
I work with a lot of people, and they've been, they're without them, I couldn't be where I am. So.
And then actually, Woodstock was a very well documented.
Very well documented, and and I think that logistically fascinating. So, the fact that they keep talking about it, I'm always happy. I get to read more about it.
Yeah. But narrative shrinks, right? It simplifies. We don't have time for the whole sprawling story, right?
You'd only be able to do that if you relived it, and that's impossible.
Right. What do we really remember now of music from the 1890s or the 1930s or?
Yeah, the 1890s, very, very little. What exists is there's no recordings really from 1890. There are some very, very obscure things.
Well, Lomax recorded Jelly Roll Morton singing some old Bordello songs.
Right, I'm saying, but it's very, very little.
Exactly.
Very little.
Yeah.
I know just in terms of that, which I think, there's cylinders. which are precursors to vinyl, to discs.
Right.
The way they worked is that the stylus was vibrated by a speaker, and or whatever. It just
By
basically
a wax.
Right. So the cylinder would spin, and it would just burn the groove into, because a record is just a groove wrapped around itself, right? It's a straight line, but it goes in a spiral. On a cylinder, it just wraps around the cylinder the same way. And I was at the Library of Congress in the audio department talking to one of the bosses down there, and I said, we were looking at all these old cylinders, and I said, were there ever any hits? Like, how did that work? Because they would do, when you go record, you make a cylinder. And I said, and he goes, oh yeah, we have those one song that was a pretty big hit. I think it's called The Laughing Song. And I said, well, how many copies did they sell? And he's like, oh, probably tens of thousands. And I suddenly thought about it, like, wait a minute. How did they mass produce that? Because vinyl is like you have stampers and it's a press. But how would you do that with a cylinder?
Did he know?
Yeah, the guy would go in every day and play the song over and over and over and over. Every version is a unique version.
Okay. Whoa.
Now maybe they might have daisy chained them. They may have 2 or 3 cylinder machines running at the same time. But still, he recorded the song over and over and over and over. So if you have 2 copies, there very well be 2 different versions of the song.
That's really interesting.
And you can find it on YouTube. And it's an insane song. It's like he's like, ha 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 ha. I mean, can you imagine going to work every day and doing that song over and over and over and over and over and over to fulfill the market demand?
Yeah.
That's some tenacity.
And that must have been a sea change too, because it used to just be sheet music. You could
Right.
make your fortune writing a ditty and selling the sheet music.
Right. So anyway, you're saying about documentation.
Well, there's documentation and narrative, and it seems like narrative is maybe there's no answer to the question that I'm so convolutedly trying to get at, but there's narrative, there's a way things are popularly understood, and there's smaller, more specialized understandings of what music was, Like, I didn't listen to Black Flag in 1992. I was I'd been listening to Fugazi for about 3 years by then. So there's sort of a narrative of how I remember that music. And then I have sort of a backwards journey that went from Fugazi to earlier bands that I'd somehow missed in my mullet and classic rock radio days in Kansas. Do you have any sense for what the archive will become, how it will serve a narrative eventually?
Is that the question you were going to ask?
Well, that's...
Because you never even got to that convoluted question, I don't think.
Yeah.
Or is that the question?
Well, I can dig into the convolutions.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think that, like, obviously your understanding of Woodstock is very narrative. It's received, it's through the documentary film and through books and other people who were there at the time, right? A lot of people who have received, like 15-year-olds today will understand the 90s through a received, like there's sort of a sainted understanding of Kurt Cobain, right? There's this idea of him, maybe even like I grew up at a time where there's a sainted conception of Jimi Hendrix, for example, the person who died young, and then they're sort of understood through their young, beautiful sainthood.
It's funny, because I don't think of Hendrix as being sainted in the same way Cobain was. But I think Cobain was really part of it is the way I kind of think it's the way he projected himself, but he became emblematic of I think the media really thought that's like he's like Sid Vicious or something. He became emblematic of a particular era.
Right.
Whereas Hendrix, I think Hendrix's musical genius was so undeniable, so much more so than Cobain's. And Hendrix was from another planet. That's another guy that I've deeply studied and continue to study. Probably my single favorite musician in the world. And I have studied and studied. I have 40 gigs of bootleg recordings. I'm fascinated by him. That guy recorded so much in his brief life. It's just, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of studio stuff. And his relationship with his instrument was, like, yeah, celestial. But I think that Cobain, he was really, emblematic or a symbol of a really particular era of what was perceived as disaffection. I'm more ambivalent about it, obviously, because Kurt was clearly super gifted. Grohl played a huge role in that band. Like, if you listen to Bleach, which is the record before, have you done time with that record?
I have. I actually, much like Fugazi 13 Songs, I discovered it on the back of a tape.
So that record is like, I think, people liked that record, but it wasn't like a record that blew everybody's mind.
Right.
But then Nevermind comes along, but Grohl was in that band. And Grohl had a lot to do, I think, with the writing of that record. Because his pop sensibility is, look, he's still doing it,
Right. Yeah.
And it's not to my taste necessarily. I'm just saying that Dave is a musical genius. But I think but Kurt was the front person.
Yeah.
And he was also a really complicated guy,
Clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly.
So I don't know what your convoluted question is.
Right.
Because I'm not sure about documentation, Nirvana, kids in 20 years. I don't know what is it all. What are we getting at?
Well, I guess I'm trying to connect. Like, obviously, something happened when you decided to document the Teen Idols. It grew into something bigger, and now it's sort of
Yeah, but it wouldn't have mattered for me.
You think Dischord would have happened either way?
No, I'm saying it doesn't matter whether it got bigger or not. I don't think of success in terms of numbers. So there's plenty of things I've been involved with that I think are very deeply important,
right,
that most people have never heard of. Like I mentioned Lungfish a couple of times.
Right.
That's a band who I think we did 11 records with them, but most people don't know them.
Right.
But that to me is a band that is profoundly important. Or a band called Antelope, who I think are incredible. Or Slant Six. Or these are all these bands that were I'm so glad to have been able to document them, because they were keepers of that flame. They were making it happen.
Are those all local to DC?
They're all DC area. Lungfish are from Baltimore, but we counted them as part of our milieu. But it's like the Black Flag thing. A lot of times it's these little records. And it's interesting because it even gets more tiny. Like, for instance, on a regional level, like in Washington, D.C., like, the scene here was small. And we, as an engine, the fuel we were burning was the music we were listening to from outside. We'd hear it and we'd absorb it, and that would inspire us. Are you familiar with Generation X?
The band?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're a band from England. The singer Billy Idol. You've heard of Billy Idol.
Sure.
So
he was an MTV star.
Right. So Billy Idol is sold, he's well known on that, less so now, but very well known guy. Sold millions. He had a song called White Wedding. But prior to that, he was a singer in a punk band called Generation X, and they did, I think, their first album is absolutely perfect record. It's a great, great record. When he left that band, he and the bass player left. Is that right? The other guys formed a new band called Empire.
Okay.
And Empire put out a single and an album. Which did not sell at all. In fact, the story is, the legend is that there were so many returns, they just melted them all down. The record died. But a few copies made it here, and it became the source material in many ways for us.
By here you mean DC?
Washington, D.C.
Okay.
The scene, my neck of the woods, my scene in Washington.
Right.
We loved the Empire record, and we studied the shit out of that record. And it's funny because those guys, the guys from that band, Bob Andrews is a guitar player for Generation X, and then also in Empire. Like many years later, like he would have thought of that record as a total. I mean, most people think of that as an abject failure, but for this weird little pocket of kids in Washington D.C., that record was one of the most sought after records. I love stuff like that.
Huh.
You know, I love that. I love that stuff. And though we were inspired by that music deeply. And then music we made inspired other bands and so forth. So bands like Nirvana, like, or Elliott Smith, you just mentioned Heat Miser being like very Fugazi-esque. Yeah. Fugazi was a product. I mean, everybody in the band Fugazi listened to Empire.
Interesting.
And yet, so the inspiration we received from that, it was in the ingredient list, right?
Yeah.
That other people ate.
I wonder how far back you can trace, you know?
Keeps on going.
Yeah.
That's the thing, it's a chain. And that's what I'm interested in.
Just from, well, actually there's been a lot of articles recently about the 90s, and they're not really about Cobain, but they just sort of talk about this sea change. They talk very simplistically about the sea change that he initiated, right?
Right.
And so you obviously know that everything that predated Nirvana, right? But there's people who, they use it as a metaphor now. It's just this truism that illustrates another point.
For a certain segment of society, it is true.
Right.
But that segment of society, in my mind, is also the segment of society that says that, you know, Cheesecake Factory is a fancy meal. You know, like that's just like, in other words, I'm not trying to be denigrating. It's literally, from my point of view, it's like it's people. It's the same way I might look at like you asked me about ballet. I'd say like Bolshoi. You know, I don't know a damn thing about ballet.
Right.
So I have the most simplistic grasp. So I wouldn't be able to give you the history of ballet. Even jazz. I love the idea of jazz. I'm scared to get near it because that is some deep waters. And forget like classical or so-called classical music. That is deep that I don't even know where to begin with something like that. But my milieu, I understand enough of it. What I can tell you about this sort of simplistic notion of history, like for instance, recently there was Ken Burns did his version of the Vietnam War thing. Did you watch that?
I didn't. I watched the Stanley Carno one years ago, but I also grew up with Vietnamese kids and I spent time in Vietnam.
Okay, so I found that, and I'm not a big fan of documentary stuff, and I'm not a big fan of Ken Burns necessarily. I just don't. I didn't look at Civil War. I didn't look at jazz. But the Vietnam War had a real effect on me as a kid.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Like I was really affected by it, and so and I've read more about that war. It's played a huge part of my, like Kent State, you know, like all that stuff that was going on was really affected me as a child. And my parents went to a church that was anti-war, was very super lefty, and a lot of energy was spent trying to put it into this criminal act. And when the war ended, in my brain at 12 years old, I thought that's the end of that. There'll never be another war again.
Yeah.
I really thought that because it just seemed so clearly on the face of it insane that people were doing this to other human beings. But anyway, I watched that documentary, and I'm sure that people can tear it to pieces for its oversimplification, even though it was like 20 hours long or something. But there was a piece of footage in there, a piece of information that I gathered from that, which was there's a very famous scene of a monk burning
self-immolation.
Right.
Yeah.
My understanding has always been, and I'd say probably 19 out of 20 or 49 out of 50 or 99 out of 100 people's understanding of that was an act of protest against the American involvement in the war. And according to this documentary that Ken Burns made, that is not the case.
Was it against the local ruler, the local?
It was about Diem, the Catholic president, who was, just raining hell on the Buddhists, and it was a protest about. It was an intramural problem.
Yeah.
It was about them. It was about the issue. That was something I knew nothing about. Nothing whatsoever. And I'm a guy who thought of myself as a student to some degree. I also had no idea that Ho Chi Minh lived in America. I did not know that. I also didn't know that in 1941 or 1940 or 41, that the U.S. partnered with Ho Chi Minh
to fight
gave money to fight the Japanese.
Yeah.
Like, the point is, like, I didn't go to college, so I didn't study deeply any of this stuff. But I thought that I had a pretty good grasp on the situation. I didn't, right? I learned things. I learned things in that documentary that I just had not been aware of. But it's the way it is in life, that you can't be all this little minutia. It's hard to stay, so it's easier to boil it down. In the case of punk history, in New York there was the Ramones, and then the Sex Pistols, and then Nirvana.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And for those of us,
well, I'm just wondering if this is a weapon against, if this is a.
Well, it is in a way, but that's not when you just said that you were gesturing up to my archive room, and it's not a weapon against that necessarily. What I realize is that there's very little evidence of people being able to create on their own outside of the machinery.
Yes.
Right.
Which is key.
Right.
Which is a key
part
of your whole.
Right. Because the record industry has created a situation in which they apparently are responsible for and the owners of music and music history. So if you think about every year, the best song, the best record, those awards are named every time, right? Almost always, except for maybe the occasional sort of street cred move on their part in recent years, those songs or bands or records are on major labels or distributed by major labels. When you think about the time that you and I are talking, the number of songs that are being written, that have been written or played around the world, what are the chances that every best song is always on a major label? It's not true. They're saying in our ecosystem, this is the best song, and the best song generally has to do with sales, right?
Right.
As
an aside, I think you're starting to ask my question. You're starting to address the question I couldn't quite ask. Have you been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
No.
Okay. I went there last summer. I drove my nephew to college, and on the way back I watched a baseball game and went to the Rock Hall of Fame. It was a really weird place to be, in part because of what you were just saying, is that the history is written by these successes.
By them, right.
Actually, some of Jimi Hendrix's drawings were there. He drew pictures of football players when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Oregon Ducks, USA.
So did I. Another reason that Hendrix and I are very similar. But here's the deal.
But I was looking for evidence, just to finish the thought, I was looking for evidence of these local scenes that were meaningful to me. And they did have, I was more of an Oregon music guy than a Kansas music guy, because I had a mullet and listened to U2 and Van Halen on the radio, right, when I was in Kansas. And then I discovered Fugazi and other bands. And then I traveled backwards and was going to Heat Miser shows in Portland.
Right.
And so I was looking for the Heat Misers. And in a way, it was fun to see, the Seattle stuff. They've sort of reverse engineered the localness of Seattle because of Nirvana and those other bands, so that you'll see U-Men or whatever represented in the Rock Hall of Fame.
Right.
But yeah, there wasn't. I mean, maybe eventually, a lot of cool music has gone through Portland since, Frank Black moved there, and the Pavement or whatever, And so I guess that is.
What about the Wipers?
Well, yeah. What about the Vipers?
Who are like the band that made the difference, right?
Another band I discovered in reverse.
Or Dead Moon.
Calamity Jane.
Right,
yeah.
Calamity Jane.
I used to see Dead Moon, and I just thought they were strange. They seemed so old to me.
They were strange and old.
Yeah.
Incredible.
But way cooler than
Fred Cole's a genius.
Yeah.
In his history, he used to sing in this band called The Weeds in the 60s, a garage rock band.
Okay.
They had a great record. The guy, he's just a life for that dude. He's dead now. Rest his soul, but...
Right? No, yeah, Dead Moon was cooler than cool.
So the thing is, I think the point for me is not... I understand that that's their history. Like, I also don't expect my stuff to be hung up in the NASCAR Hall of Fame either. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah.
The major label industry is like, that's not what I'm involved with. They don't own music. Music was here before they were. They're a bottling company. Other rivers run. Like, there's different springs. Not everybody has to drink from their manufactured water.
Agreed, and that's why it's exciting. I mean, that's why I was sold. Waiting Room wasn't finished by the time I knew I was a Fugazi fan. Right. I was so stultified by all this shit I've been listening to. Nothing against it, it's a lot of the same thing.
I understand.
And that was at a time, there were some other bands that did the same thing. Because the Cheesecake Factory ruled music, that was why I could get excited. I had an emotional relationship to Waiting Room before it was done, before I finished listening to it for the first time. So there's institutional memory, and then there's whatever is happening up here. Does institutional memory...
Are you talking about upstairs?
I'm talking about upstairs. Okay, this is an audio podcast.
Archive room, okay.
And again, this is the question that maybe I'll never be able to ask clearly.
Well, let me try to get into this thing about what's going on why I'm doing this.
Right. Which I'm
okay, I guess we should explain, like, what he keeps referring to, or what you keep referring to. Sorry, I've told the audience for a second. What you're referring to is the fact that I have a room, which was my bedroom, by the way. I lived in that room for 21 years, and I actually wrote Waiting Room upstairs in that room.
No kidding.
In that room. That was where I wrote it. In that room, now, there's no bed. There's tape decks, there's tapes, there's photos and documents. It's an archive, and it's pretty well organized. It's getting more work to do, but compared to most collections, pretty well organized. And a lot of people have asked me, why are you doing this? Like, what is the point of this? Why are you organizing all these papers, all this stuff? Most people, when they die, even with wills, leave a lot of question marks. Like, what do we do with all this stuff? In my case, I had this enormous amount of material that I had saved because I felt like it was important. Now, you might say important to who? Well, for starters, to me. That's who it was important to. But I think because of my interest in a particular part of the underground, where culture was being created in real time, culture that will never be properly documented, never be properly understood by mainstream, because it was culture that stood in the face of mainstream. It was culture that grew in the shadow, that if you expose it to the light of the mainstream is no longer underground. It's culture that would be like a network that once exposed to light dies. Right? It's like it's a mushroom that is filled with nutrition and properties that once exposed are rendered empty and void, right? Like become negligible. So, but that existed. That underground scene existed. It existed in a way that for someone like a kid from Kansas with his fucking mullet is listening, comes across a piece of music and it's like, whoa, what is this? And then suddenly that life changes, like, because it opens up the door, and the door doesn't lead to another great band necessarily. It might lead to be to being a travel writer, right? Because suddenly the world, the grid that we had created for ourselves, or the grid that had been created for us to exist in, was blowed open. That's the point. Like, that's what the underground. So I have this stuff. To me, I think it's important, but not important to American culture in the sense of the record industry, but important to the culture for all the generations of people who will come, who I think would be important to know that, oh yeah, sometimes people do shit because it's the thing to do, not because they were trying to make money,
Right.
not because they're trying to be famous, not because they wanted to be in a museum. Somebody did it because it was the thing to do to feel connected to other human beings and to continue to celebrate the new idea. It will never stop. Punk will never die. It won't be called punk necessarily. It'll never die. But I think when you have a situation in which kids, literally kids, people under the age of 20, are forming their own bands, writing their own songs, putting on their own shows, putting on their own records, their own fanzines, creating entire ecosystems, communities, networks, where, at 18 years old, I'm on the fucking phone to somebody from Reno who I'd never met before and becoming great friends with them. I know people all over the world now just because through this weird underground music that most people in this country will never even... I mean, Fugazi, for as famous as it might be for some, is completely unknown to others. And in fact, when you get right down to it, 99.9% of the world will never hear of anything I've ever done. It does not matter. What matters is for people who are looking for some evidence that things like this can be done, that's the reason to organize it.
Have you read any Grill Marcus? He wrote a book called... Actually, I read that...
Lipstick Traces?
Lipstick Traces, yeah.
Yeah, I have it. I've never read it.
There's a personal story. It's part of my Fugazi story, actually. I've heard that Greg Ginn, is it Ginn?
Ginn.
Yeah. Greg Ginn read about punk and decided that he wanted to create punk music. Like, he hadn't really heard it, but he read about the concept, and that was the seed of him moving.
And then you read Lipstick Traces as a kid?
Yes. So I discovered Fugazi and some other bands, and then Lipstick Traces connects punk to the Dada art movement of the post-World War I.
Which, of course, it is.
Right. And so that popped into my head while you were talking. And he says that every once in a while, youth finds these undiffused bombs in the litter of culture, and it excites them. I'm not quoting him perfectly, but there was this connection. It's the punk idea. He connected Dada art to the punk idea, and so I guess we're slowly unpacking my convoluted question. Obviously, the archive serves personal memory, and you're very much a curator in real time of everything that's happened in the Dischord house.
Yeah, but it has another purpose. That's not my personal memory. That's not for my personal memory is already there. I don't need those things.
Well, then I guess what's the institutional memory of all this? How are you going to curate it in such a way that it's understood when this is the Dada for the
I don't know if it's
2070s?
going to be understood. I mean, what happened in my brain is different than what happened in other participants' brain.
Right.
So I can't tell the story. I actually don't really believe in the narrative arc of history. The idea of leaving the evidence is not to tell the story. It's for people to see the evidence. Like I just showed you this card from Dave Grohl. And that was, I think that probably kind of was illuminating for you.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't tell you the story. I didn't tell you this, that, and this, and the other thing. I just showed it to you. So maybe that there's aspects of it that are, people can draw their own conclusions, Well,
that's a story that goes beyond music too. That's about youth and becoming and
right.
Ambition
right, and it's reoccurring.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, I was not your age in 1992.
Yeah.
And I was not a guy with a mullet in Wichita. But I was a kid, a skateboarder in D.C. listening to Ted Nugent.
Yeah.
And I have no regrets about it whatsoever. What I can tell you about Ted Nugent and the 1970s rock and roll, that era where I was skateboarding, one of the reasons I skateboarded because music seemed completely out of reach. It seemed...
As a musician?
I played piano since I was long as I can remember. And I tried to figure out how to play guitar, but I couldn't understand it whatsoever. I couldn't transfer piano knowledge to the neck of a guitar. I could not understand how to play a guitar. It just didn't make sense to me what a chord was. I didn't understand that. But when I watched, like listen to Jimi Hendrix or The Who or the Beatles, I thought, oh, I want to play guitar. But it was completely, utterly out of reach. It would be as if you were, you played, football with your friend, you even tackle football out in the yard or something, and then you look at the NFL and like, well, I can't do that. It's just from a whole. It's as if they are in a different strata, and that's the way music was presented to me. It was like there was nothing I could actually do, and not only did I not know how I wasn't where they were. I didn't know how they could possibly get there. Like it didn't make it. I'm from Washington D.C. I didn't know any musicians. I didn't know anything about rock and roll except that I liked listening to it. I'd never really seen bands, so I just thought, well, that's totally out of reach. I mean, how would I wouldn't be able to do that any more than I would be able to be, a king or a queen or a movie star. These are all completely. It's just different. So I thought, well, what can I do? At 13 or 14 or 15, I think, well, I can skateboard. And the thing about being a skateboarder was at the time, that 70s era is when the urethane wheel came along. Skateboarding, though it was thought of as like a yo-yo almost, or a hula hoop, like a hobby, but it wasn't.
Did you have one of those skinny boards?
In the beginning, sure.
Boards?
Yeah. And then I had big fat ones, went all. But skateboarding was not a hobby, and skateboarding certainly wasn't a sport. Like nobody took it seriously as a sport, but none of us thought of it as sports because sports were kind of, sports had no. We weren't trying to be competitive in that light. Skateboarding was a discipline. Because it was just a stick, a piece of wood with some wheels on it. You brought it to life, right? You brought it to life. You're the one. Your investment is what made it more than a piece of wood with some wheels tacked onto it. What you did with it, what individually you did with it, with your friends, what you did socially with it, what you did with that skateboard. One thing skateboard for me, what a skateboard did for me was took me out of the party. You go to the high school party and everybody's like, we're going to get drunk. I'm like, later, we're going skating. I always had somewhere to be. Because skateboarding, we just go skateboarding. You go out in the middle of the night and the world was yours. You had a whole other world to look at. And skateboarding taught me how to redefine that world around me. So I think skateboarding as a discipline and as something that knit me and my friends together, like my closest friends skateboarding, like Henry Garfield, Henry Rollins, right? That's our friendship was founded on skateboarding and listening to rock and roll together. But those people, like yesterday, I visited with my friend Mark Sullivan, who was also like on the skateboard team with me. These are like super tight. We saw ourselves as outcasts from society, renegades who had found something to focus on that took us out of other people's affairs, and we had our own thing to do. Perfect training for punk rock. Once punk came along, I started learning about it from my high school friends in 1978, really. And I'd seen the media's depiction of it, which was, ridicule and like sensationalist. But my friends got into it, and I remember saying, like, well, this music is weird sounding. It scares me. I don't like it. And I hear that at parties, and then I kept arguing, oh, Ted Nugent's good and punk sucks. But then at some point, they said, well, have you studied it? Have you actually listened to it? No. So I borrowed records. I listened to them. They were freaky sounding and scared. I've said this in many interviews, but I'll say it again, that if you grow up eating a hamburger and french fries for dinner every night, when someone puts down a bowl of vegetable rice vermicelli in front of you, it doesn't look like or smell like or taste like dinner. But it is dinner for millions and millions and millions and millions of people, and it's probably better for you. It just takes that moment of learning how to switch your brain. I had already learned how to switch my brain through skateboarding.
Skateboarding is really place-based too. Going back to one of my obsessions. Actually, skateboarders make good travelers because they're not going to they're going to look at the obelisk at Place de la Concorde. They're not going to think about it as a tourist. They're going to figure out how to skate.
Right, they're looking at everything differently. And to give you an idea of the impact, Rollins and I, we took a bus to California in 1978. I was 16, he was 17, by ourselves. We took a Greyhound bus to California to go skateboarding and to see skateboarders.
This was
before the punk.
Okay.
Yeah, we were skateboarders.
Huh.
First time I ever heard of Van Halen was in the back of a pickup truck outside the Upland Pipeline Skate Park.
What year was this?
1978,
okay.
Summer of 78. We took a Greyhound bus there and back. That's a crazy ride for a 16 and 17-year-old boys.
No, I read Get in the Van.
Yes.
It came out the year I was living in a van. I was traveling just to see America, living in a Volkswagen van. And so it was funny to make those comparisons. I didn't have rock shows to go to, but I had the same privation. Did you have similar experiences? Like when Minor Threat was touring, were you hungry a lot? Was there a lot of sleeping 5 to a room?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny though. I had to say that Henry and I, he's really one of my dearest friends. We talk almost every week. I love him dearly, and I've known him since I was 11 years old. But we're different people,
Oh yeah, no, you can tell.
And when I read the book, I always kept thinking, well, get out of the van. It's like, get out of the van. It's just funny but Henry.
Well, he gives you a shout out as sort of this voice of reason.
Right.
He'll come back to DC.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Henry, I love him so much. And the thing about him is that what's so incredibly admirable about the guy is that he wants to do well. And he works so hard. And he's really almost selfless in his work. So the misery he was feeling was real. Like my response would have been like, I'm getting out of the van. Like I never would have done, not because I don't mind, like I work hard, but I'm not going to be like, if somebody like in the immediate environment is, if it's unhealthy, I'm not doing it.
Well, it felt like he needed that to perform. Yeah. He needed something to react against. There was some sort of,
it was part of the equation for sure.
Yeah.
But I had my own equation.
Right.
So Minor Threat, certainly, it was, we toured and it was we probably made less money than Black Flag, frankly. And I toured with Black Flag in 1981. Did you hear Henry and I just did a radio show about it?
No.
For
who?
We know he has a radio show.
Oh, for his radio show.
Yeah. So okay. every year, Amy, my partner Amy, and our son Carmine, we go out to California every April, just like our sojourn. And every time I'm out there, I always try to do a show with Henry. Uh-huh. So I've been on his radio show once a year. This year, I thought let's talk specifically about the December 81 Black Flag UK tour, in which I was the roadie. It's in the book, but now you get to hear my side of it. I kept a journal, so I had a journal of the whole thing. So it was really good to talk. And so it's on now. You can find it, I'm sure.
He sort of hated it, right? Henry didn't care much for the UK. I mean, there's a lot of sour...
Yeah, I mean, that's just the tone.
Yeah.
I mean, it was... pretty hateable, frankly. The situation was so crazy. Because we got there, and the band we were supposed to tour with canceled the tour. So we were...
Which band was that?
The Exploited.
Oh, The Exploited, yeah.
Which would have been even more horrible had we actually done the tour.
They still make music.
Yeah, Waddy had a heart attack on stage.
When?
5 years ago, but he still plays.
Okay.
Yeah, so he hurt his ankle supposedly. They canceled the tour. So then suddenly there was no tour. So Black Flag was just picking up shows the last minute.
Huh.
It was so strange. And we had no money. And we got what we got every day: 2 rolls, a hunk of cheese, and an apple.
From who?
From Greg and Chuck.
Okay. Huh.
They were like the meisters. They were the proctors of the band, right? They were the bosses.
Right. Actually,
Greg Ginn, Chuck Dukowski. So they would get.
Did Chuck drive? Did he drive the van?
I was the first one to. He did, but
Okay.
in England, I was the first one to drive,
Right.
because they were too freaked out. to drive on the wrong side of the road.
Right.
So they asked me to do it. I mean, it was insane. But yes, I mean, I think for most people, if I tell the story when I did, like people are like, I can't believe you did that. But at the time it was like, that's life. That's the thing about touring, is like the moments you're going into the moment. Like you're not waiting for them to come to you, right? So like you're in the moment. And there's circumstances. When I think about some of the Fugazi, I mean, Fugazi toured super hardcore. We played over 1,000 shows. We did a lot of touring, and our touring was sometimes, it was sketchy what we were up against. You know, we would do 65 shows in 70 days or something, all over Europe, and you have no idea what you might run into.
Were you sleeping in friendly houses?
Sometimes friendly, sometimes not so friendly.
Yeah. Were you able to enjoy Europe, or was it sort of a work trip?
Why they have to be separate?
Well, I mean, that's...
I've never gone as a tourist.
Right.
But I love the world that way. I like to have a job. I want to see the kitchen.
Yeah.
That's me. I prefer... it's very hard for me. I've never really vacated.
Right. I was just thinking, I remember when I was reading Henry's book, that every once in a while he could be sour, but then suddenly you could tell he was appreciating where he was, you know.
Henry's an incredible traveler, and he does appreciate. Even then, I think he was like, the world's. It's just. I mean, we had a reason to be somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a travel writer.
Yeah.
So I assume that you've been. Like, if you've been in Asia, you've probably seen like hordes of Dutch or Germans or whatever,
Sure.
and you're like, and they're just like, oh, it's our playground, but that's not. That's not necessarily I don't imagine you think of it as your playground.
No, I mean, there's an extent to which that I'm working.
You're working, right? I'm not an extent. You are working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, for me, I can remember, like, Fugazi would be on tour and we'd be in Italy on the Autostrada, right, their highway system. And have you traveled through Italy?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so, when you pull off the Autostrada, you go to the rest area, and the rest areas are, like, insanely fancy. Super nice, right? So we would stop to get a cup of tea and get gas and take a piss, whatever, and have maybe a bite to eat or something. And inevitably, a bus would pull in and all these American tourists would get off. And the way their tourist energy was so humiliating as an American, we would just keep our mouths shut. We wanted to be just part of the world. We didn't want to see the world as a snow globe that we weren't in. We wanted to be in the globe, you know.
Sure, yeah.
I think growing up in Washington, D.C. made us hypersensitive to that. This is a tourist town.
Yeah. This is the first time I flew here.
Right.
9th grade trip to D.C.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, was it a outward bound?
No, it was like a junior high civics class.
Was it? But then it wasn't part of a program like they used to have a name for them. Because every spring I get these kids, 9th grade kids and high school kids would call me up and say, "I'm in town. I can't really get." They might sneak out of their hotel or something.
It was basically the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was outward bound.
But the point is that I think I'm a little traumatized by tourists growing up in Washington. Because there's so many people come and they just become like, look at that. They're just pointing and not
herds of
right. They're just in a different place. And I think that I feel like the world, if you go looking, if you go staring or ogling or
sightseeing.
Yeah, but if that's the tonality of it, then the world behaves differently. If you go just as part of the world, you see something that you don't get to see otherwise. And I think being in a band gives you this incredible opportunity because you're working and you get to be. So I've not been, for instance, to name most landmarks, but I've seen them driving by.
Right.
But I've been grocery shopping in Bergen, Norway.
Yeah.
I've done that, and that's pretty cool. Yeah. I've gotten gas in Dunedin in New Zealand. I've done that. I have these really intense experiences in my life. Traveled all over the world, but I'm working, and I don't. And the other thing about it is that I'm the one. We did it. We weren't being handled. We were the handlers.
Well, it gives you a pretext too. It's like skateboarding. If you
right.
if you bring your skateboard to Berlin, then
right.
you're going to meet Berliner skateboarders.
Right.
You know, if you bring your band to Berlin, you're going to meet musicians, you're going to meet fans,
Right.
things
You have
like
a
that.
reason to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Have you talked to Henry about his recent travels?
Of course.
Because he's the real deal. I mean,
He is the real deal. That dude always has a list. He has a list of all the no-fly zones, and he goes.
Yeah.
That's his thing. North Korea. He's been to Myanmar. He goes everywhere.
No, he's spoken really intelligently. I've traveled a lot, but you listen to him talk about travel, and it's clear that he has an intuitive level.
Yeah.
Sort of him and his camera wandering the earth.
It's great. Have you seen his slideshow he does?
I've seen his book.
Yeah, this book is great.
Yeah.
He did a slideshow tour where he showed the photos, and he's brilliant. He's always been that way too. When I first met him, his mom used to take him. They used to travel all the time.
Okay.
So he'd been his passport was stamped by the time I met him at 12.
Right.
I didn't leave the country until I went to England.
Okay.
In 1981. I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
I'd never been overseas before that. But boy, that changes. When you start to travel, you start to understand the world a whole other way.
Yeah.
I remember when being in England and looking at the television, and there was a Let's Make a Deal or some Price is Right.
In England?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was a Price is Right or some same a game show.
Right.
That was there. It was a British version of it. It was like the British host and the British people and the British products. And I'm watching it and I'm thinking, this is so fucking moronic. And I realized, it's moronic here too.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that because I'd only been eating it. So I didn't know that it tasted stupid.
It was the water you swam in.
Right. And that's when you start traveling, you start recognizing that over and over and over and over again. There's no question that because I think the geographic component of North America, and specifically the United States of America's sort of monopolization of that concept of North America, leaving out Mexico and Canada,
right.
But this idea that it's so, the xenophobia that comes as a result of that, which is understandable. Because we're on an island. We're on an island of monocultural island that's getting increasingly more monocultural. That the rest of the world seemed unreal. And I can remember being a child and just I don't know if I actually prayed at night. Probably I did in some way. But I remember having to give thanks and just thanking God that I was an American. Over and over and over, because I couldn't imagine what poor schmuck would have been fucking born in, Germany or born in Japan with these poor losers. Because here I was in the greatest country in the history of the world, and then I realized that there's little kids in those countries praying the same exact goddamn thing about their country. But I had to go there to realize that. And once you realize, then we're one thing. Yeah. I get it.
This has been Deviate with Rolf Potts. More about everything that was just mentioned, including links to Dischord Records and its digital archive of live Fugazi shows, can be found in the show notes at rolfpotts.com/deviate. And as always, you can contact me with insights or questions at deviate@rolfpotts.com. This episode was produced by myself and Justin Glow. Cedar Van Tassel does the music. Thanks for listening, and I hope you tune in for future episodes of Deviate with Rolf Potts.